It's hard to find a genre more hotly debated than roguelikes. Whether or not a game counts as a roguelike can be debated for hours. Now, I'm not about to dive into roguelikes versus roguelites, but for me, the more interesting question is what makes the genre so adaptable. The fact that so many unique styles of games are arguably roguelikes means there are some interesting things going on in their design. We've watched a flood of roguelikes get released over the past 10 years that all feel very different, but they still rhyme. So what is it about the design of roguelikes that can adapt to so many different settings and playstyles? And how have the most popular games over time taken that roguelike core and evolved it into something fresh and new? Today, let's talk about the design of roguelikes and why they're such a hotbed for modern game design experimentation. So what is a roguelike? It's definitely this, and this, but it could also be this, or this, or this. The term roguelike comes from old Usenet discussion boards, where people searched for games that were similar to Rogue. Rogue was created in 1980 by Glenn Wickman, Michael Toy, and Ken Arnold, and released at first for Unix mainframes, then adapted for home computers. It wasn't the first game that we might today call a roguelike, but it became very popular. Rogue was the standard, and so the other games imitating it were called roguelikes. Over the next few decades, different offshoots like the Mystery Dungeon games and Lindley's Dungeon Crawl would borrow tons of elements from Rogue, refining systems, and slowly morphing what a roguelike could be. To try to nail down what exactly a roguelike was, a group of developers came together in 2008 at the International Roguelike Development Conference in Berlin to create a checklist of 8 must-haves for any pure roguelike. First, random dungeon generation. The game should randomly put together dungeons from scratch or from custom prefabricated pieces. Second, permadeath. No checkpoints. Your actions could have deadly consequences, so you better keep an eye out for trouble. Third, turn-based gameplay. The world only takes action when you do, step for step, attack for attack. You can plan your next move for as long as you like. Fourth, non-modal gameplay. This just means that you have every action available to you from the start of the game, and there aren't any different modes you enter while you're playing. It contrasts with a Metroidvania style system that grants new abilities as you play the game. In a pure roguelike, you should be able to go wherever you want and interact with everything you see. Fifth, emergent gameplay. The world operates under certain rules, like say, flammability, fatigue, health limits, poison, and dozens of other mechanics. The rules apply to the world and its characters just as much as they apply to you. Sixth, limited resources. You have a certain amount of health, stamina, time, steps, or other resources. Manage them well to stay alive for as long as you can. Seventh, hack and slash gameplay. This one's pretty specific. In a traditional roguelike, you will be fighting through waves of enemies and clearing dungeon floors. Eighth, mystery items. The things you come across on your journey might have special properties, but you might not have any idea what they'll do. Even if you've seen the same item before, item properties can change in a new life. This list of 8 high-value key factors is called the Berlin Interpretation of Roguelikes. I think it's a little limiting, but at least we can use that as a definition for the most vanilla roguelike. And it's a great starting point for talking about how games have tweaked the basic design into all the different flavors of roguelike-inspired games that exist today. Different combos of the 8 elements of the Berlin interpretation play off of each other incredibly well and help create the feel of a roguelike. Mystery items and random dungeon generation make each new session a unique experience. Turn-based and non-modal gameplay make you feel like you're driving the game's outcome at your own pace, rather than waiting for the game to unlock something to let you proceed, or being rushed into making a hasty decision. Limited resources and permadeath raise the stakes. Even though you can just start a new life, you don't get the same resources every time. Every play session becomes something worth preserving. But the most important combo of them all might be random dungeon generation and permadeath. These combine to make run-based gameplay, which is the very heart of the roguelike, the common denominator between almost all the games with that roguelike feel. Run-based gameplay is a way to make a game that feels surprising and fair, rewarding, and replayable. From a familiar set of base elements, it creates unexpected new experiences. It rewards understanding systems instead of memorizing and klutzing your way through the same encounters over and over. These game design combos are kind of like chords in music. The same chord can be in dozens of hit songs, each of them with their own feel, but they all use the same basic tool to get there. They're all unique paths using the same stepping stone. It's maybe what's a little strange about the Berlin Interpretation. I don't think that it's useful to stick to a rigid definition. It's helpful when you want to study the elements of a design, but sticking to it too closely will just get you cookie-cutter reskins of classics. If you start thinking of a roguelike as a mosaic of elements instead of a monolith, you open dozens of new possibilities and really good spin-off games that still have a core that's recognizable as inspired by classic roguelike design. So let's see what shows up if we start tinkering with the Berlin Interpretation a bit. Okay, starting with the strict Berlin Interpretation, we've got Rogue. Let's start by tweaking one of the low value components. There's no reason we have to stick with ASCII graphics. Put a coat of paint on everything and give your imagination a break by showing actual sprites. Done. You've discovered Dungeon Crawl's Stone Soup, or Dungeons of Dredmore. They're exactly as deep mechanically, but way easier for a beginner to understand what's going on without thumbing through a manual every 2 seconds. Now let's start changing some of the high value components. What if we start with that turn-based gameplay rule? The game doesn't have to let you think about your decisions forever. Real-time combat can still reward understanding the systems that the game has in place. It can still be very replayable, and the stakes can be just as high. But you just won't have as long to sit there and think through your actions. That sounds an awful lot like Binding of Isaac or Enter the Gungeon to me. They're roguelike experiences wrapped around a much more action-heavy combat system, but when you make a run in either of those games, it's just as compelling for all the same reasons as a run in Rogue or NetHack. While we're here swapping out turn-based gameplay, we could get even weirder with it. Instead of taking out turns entirely, maybe we could use a system that gives them a new meaning. What if the turns were musical beats instead? It would keep the same move-for-move structure that most roguelikes have, but you still have to think quickly to be effective. Now you've made Crpyt of the Necrodancer. You do have to compensate for some of these tweaks though. Necrodancer has to tone down the difficulty a bit because you have less time to plan. If it kept the same level of difficulty as a traditional roguelike, it would feel far too punishing. It's hard to think through all the complicated systems when you're busy keeping the beat. Necrodancer still lets you crank up the difficulty to ridiculous levels, but the base game is more forgiving. The game morphs into a roguelike that rewards feel, improvisation, reaction, and flow. The game's runs are shorter too, to help keep a mistake from ruining too much of your time. Also, tying a run to the end of a level song is a smart and natural way to force players to keep moving throughout the level before time expires. And Necrodancer has a killer soundtrack. Very few roguelikes tie their soundtrack to gameplay, so that's another way to make the game unique and deeply memorable. Okay, let's change up random dungeon generation. What if instead of a literal set of rooms and corridors, we have a branching path of encounters instead? And keep that real-time combat around too. That sounds like FTL to me. The weapons and systems you build up over time are very rogue-inspired. Permadeath is a constant threat, and the emergent gameplay rules are in full effect with all the different ways you can take out enemy ships, through boarding their ship and taking it over, setting the ship on fire, destroying their oxygen supply, mind controlling their crew and having them fight each other, or just blasting them to bits. FTL abstracts the idea of a dungeon from a series of rooms to a series of encounters, but it absolutely nails run-based gameplay, and still very much feels like a roguelike. Let's go back to classic random dungeon generation and now look at the permadeath wedge. One of the most popular tweaks has been in relaxing the permadeath restriction. Permadeath is a vital piece of the core of the roguelike feel, but progression is really satisfying in games. People like to change and improve over time. Making each run feel important and worth preserving relies heavily on permadeath, so we can't just swap it out entirely. But what if you could keep just a little piece of yourself between runs? Now you've got Dead Cells and Rogue Legacy, among lots of others. Dead Cells and Rogue Legacy don't just implement this mechanically. They're both narratively themed around the idea of passing bits of yourself on to the next run. You'll still lose most of your progress, so you'll want to stay alive. But you also won't feel like you've wasted your time if you die by accident after a long session. Okay, what's next? Oh, why do we have to stick to hack and slash gameplay? Turn-based tactics games use similar turn-for-turn mechanics. What if we put roguelike elements into one of those? You might end up with Into the Breach. It's styled as a tactics game, but it's turn-based, non-modal, has permadeath, has a bunch of emergent gameplay systems, there are very limited resources, and the game is structured around runs. That sounds like a roguelike to me. Unlike other tactics games, Into the Breach explicitly tells you turn orders and what actions are going to happen, and makes it feel like you can solve an encounter if you just think hard enough. It's quite difficult too, so you're going to feel like you've accomplished something if and when you beat it. Tactics games aren't the only gameplay style we can use. What if we try, I don't know, a card game? Slay the Spire is a turn-based game where your moves are your hand of cards. You can only play so many cards and must manage your deck, your health, and your money wisely as you get into fight after fight to get to the end of an encounter ladder. That sounds like a run to me. For another similar spin with a solitaire vibe, try Solitairica. It's a roguelike built around a game of golf solitaire. You encounter random monsters to beat up, and have to start back at the beginning if you lose. The tweaks you can make on the Berlin interpretation are almost endless. Spelunky makes roguelike gameplay with a great looking platformer. Moonlighter took an action-oriented roguelike like Binding of Isaac and added in character progression through a shop mechanic system. Darkest Dungeon mixed in a bunch of JRPG combat and party building influences. Invisible Ink started with a tactics game and added in just a hint of that roguelike run-based loop and wrapped in way more narrative than you'd expect. Hand of Fate has a similar deck building system that would show up later in Slay the Spire, tweaks dungeons and encounters like FTL, has a real-time combat system, and has some very high production values. Toejam Earl was synthesizing random items, dungeon crawling, and the 90s back on the Genesis. None of these games fit the Berlin interpretation perfectly, but they each use many of its rules as the foundation of their own design. From those foundations, a million new designs can be made, recognizable but still fresh. 30 years of tweaks, combinations, and refinements have turned a handful of beloved ASCII art games into a whole new genre, and a rich vein for new game design ideas.